Okay, let's unpack this. We're jumping straight into a deep dive today, guided by a really fascinating source report. It zeroes in on key governance issues in Ghana during the very end of May 2025.
That's right. Our source material is a criticality analysis from the IMANI Center for Policy and Education. And it takes a close look at several distinct but actually very interconnected accountability issues, offers some sharp analysis and recommendations.
And our mission here is really to pull out the most crucial insights from this specific report. We want to give you a clear picture of what happened, why the report flags it as important, and what the proposed ways forward look like, all through the lens of this one document.
Exactly. The report organizes its analysis around three core areas, which seems like a good way for us to structure our conversation too.
Makes sense. So first up, there's a significant issue involving accountability in Ghana's foreign missions, specifically a fraud case detailed at the embassy in Washington, D.C.
Yeah, that's a big one. Then we'll shift focus a bit, look at domestic structures. We'll explore the report's perspective on these discussions around establishing a new governance advisory council, and crucially, how it argues this should be integrated into Ghana's existing frameworks.
Right, not just creating something new for its own sake.
Precisely. And finally, we'll look at the report's analysis of some recent political reactions to a law enforcement action, this one by the EOCO, and what that might tell us about, public trust in institutions.
Okay, so it's quite a journey then, from overseas operations right down to national policymaking and even the dynamics of public response in the street. Let's dive into that first major point from the source material.
Let's do it.
Okay, so we're starting thousands of miles away, but as you said, with implications right here at home. The report really shines a bright light on accountability issues at Ghana's foreign missions, focusing heavily on this pretty significant fraud scandal uncovered at the embassy in Washington, D.C.
Yeah, and what the report highlights is just the sheer scale and, importantly, the duration of this fraud. It apparently involved an unauthorized online payment link. This thing was used to siphon off visa and passport fees for years. The report notes this started as far back as 2017.
Wow, 2017. That's a really long time for something like that to go undetected.
It is. And the source details how it eventually came to light, apparently through an audit in early 2025 that then triggered a forensic probe.
Okay, so an audit finally caught it.
Yes, and the immediate impact was quite tangible. The report says the mission actually closed temporarily on May 26, 2025, just to deal with this fallout. It only reopened 3 days later, May 29th, after they put in place a reconfigured system and new management.
And the report immediately links this scandal to President John Dramani Mahama's recently announced Reset Accountability Agenda. That was announced in May 2025, right? With 8 pillars aimed at reforming governance across the board.
Exactly. And this is where I think the core insight from the report comes in. It argues that this incident in Washington, D.C. starkly reveals a pretty significant gap between these, high-level national accountability ambitions laid out in the Reset Agenda and the actual reality of operations at a key diplomatic outpost like Washington. It really shows some serious systemic vulnerabilities.
And the report doesn't just say vulnerabilities. It seems to detail the specific system lapses that, according to their analysis anyway, allowed this fraud to go on for so long.
Right. It points to several failures. Firstly, it seems embassy procurements were somehow excluded from mandatory competitive bidding laws, things like the Audit Service Act, diplomatic service regulations. They weren't being applied properly there.
So less oversight on how certain things, maybe like these online payment systems, were actually procured in the first place.
That seems to be the implication, meaning the usual checks and balances weren't necessarily in place for these overseas purchases. Secondly, while Ghana's Auditor General can audit foreign missions, the report notes they lacked specific IT forensic expertise, and crucially, didn't have a routine mandate for these deep dive digital reviews of mission systems.
So the fraud was happening digitally.
Exactly. And the audit capacity maybe wasn't equipped or specifically directed to look for it there.
So even if they looked at the traditional books, they might miss the digital siphoning.
Precisely. And third, the report points to a failure at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the MFA itself, failure to conduct periodic reconciliation.
Which is basically just checking.
Yeah, simply checking if the fees recorded back in Accra actually match the deposits being made in Washington. That basic cross-checking wasn't happening consistently or maybe effectively enough.
Seems simple, but absolutely fundamental, right?
Totally fundamental. And apparently this was compounded by the absence of secure whistleblowing mechanisms specifically for overseas staff. So even if someone inside suspected something, there wasn't a clear, safe way to raise internal complaints until the audit basically blew the whole thing open.
Okay, so based on identifying these, well, quite deep-seated lapses, how does the report then propose bringing these missions into alignment with that national reset agenda? Does it link specific reforms to the reset's pillars?
It does, very directly. The report argues you essentially have to apply the reset principles right there at the mission level. So for fiscal discipline, that's pillar 1 of the reset agenda. This means integrating mission bank accounts into the National Treasury Single Account, the TSA.
Right.
And using the Ghana Integrated Financial Management Information System, GIFMIS, for tracking all consular fees, basically bringing them into the main national financial plumbing.
Applying the same core financial controls used domestically to the missions abroad makes sense?
Yes. Then for Pillar 4, which focuses on clearing arrears and rationalizing investments, the report suggests quarterly external reconciliations of consular revenue.
Okay.
And importantly, any discrepancies found would be fast-tracked straight to Parliament for scrutiny and, hopefully, action.
Making sure Parliament, as the public's representative, knows if there are holes in the bucket, so to speak.
Exactly. And Pillar 5, accelerating public financial management, or PFM, reforms. This requires, the report says, annual forensic IT audits of mission platforms, not just a regular audit.
A specialized one.
A specialized IT forensic one, overseen jointly by the audit service and a dedicated liaison within the MFA.
Okay, so getting that specific digital expertise in place, which, as you said, they noted was missing before.
Crucially. And the report even connects it to Pillar 6, which is about revitalizing exports. It suggests applying management information system controls and performance metrics even to the trade desks within embassies, treating them with the same kind of accountability standards as the financial units.
It really sounds like the report is arguing for a pretty complete overhaul of how overseas missions are financially and operationally controlled.
I think it is, yeah. And it points to some peer practices for inspiration. For instance, it mentions the UK has an audit in confidence approach for confidential reviews of overseas posts, trying to balance that need for scrutiny with the, sensitivities of diplomatic work.
Interesting. Balancing oversight with practicality.
And Canada, apparently, has an open data portal where they publish real-time consular dashboards that offers public transparency on service delivery metrics.
Transparency for everyone to see how things are going.
And Kenya's Public Accounts Committee, the report notes, regularly summons its ambassadors back to Parliament to answer questions on their accounts and operations. That really reinforces legislative oversight. So the report suggests Ghana can learn from and maybe adapt some of these models.
Right. So pulling all this together then, the source outlines 4 specific proposed pillars of reform, but this time for the missions themselves. What are those?
Okay, so first, legal and regulatory changes. Amending the Audit Service Act to actually mandate these annual IT forensic audits for missions, and tightening the diplomatic service regulations to require competitive bidding for ICT contracts specifically.
So codifying the necessary checks directly into law. No ambiguity.
Exactly. Second, institutional changes. Creating that dedicated joint MFA audit service liaison unit we mentioned, placing rotating financial control officers in the missions themselves, and extending whistleblower protections properly to overseas staff. It's about building the infrastructure and the human element.
Right, giving people on the ground the ability and the safety to flag issues.
Third, digital and process-wise. Implementing a unified MFA-managed consular services platform, the report even suggests potentially using blockchain for secure, verifiable receipts, and publishing those mission-level performance and financial dashboards on a public open data portal.
Using technology not just for service delivery, but actively for transparency and tracking funds.
Yeah. And finally, ethics and capacity building, establishing a clear diplomatic integrity code covering things like asset declaration, conflict of interest rules alongside mandatory annual ethics and IT forensic training for all relevant mission staff, equipping people with both the knowledge and the ethical grounding.
And the report suggests a realistic timeline for these, doesn't it? Not just throwing ideas out there.
Yes, it proposes a staged implementation, some initial steps within 6 months, broader changes within 1 year, and a full rollout within about 2 years. It tries to show a practical pathway from identifying the problem to actually implementing some comprehensive solutions.
Okay, so let's bring this back home, as you said earlier. Why should you, the listener, really care deeply about this fraud case in an embassy far away in Washington, D.C.?
Well, fundamentally, because this is about national resources. The money collected from visa and passport fees, that belongs to the nation, to Ghana. This case just shows how systemic weaknesses, even in what seems like a distant outpost, can lead directly to the siphoning off of public funds that could otherwise be used for development, for services right here back home. It's really about ensuring every single PSOA is accounted for, no matter where it's collected.
It's a very clear example that accountability isn't just a domestic issue, it has to be global. And ensuring it means fixing systems everywhere the government operates, not just within Ghana's borders.
Absolutely.
Okay, so connecting that idea of building robust systems, the report then shifts from those overseas challenges back to domestic structures here in Ghana. It discusses President Mahama's meeting with civil society leaders on May 26, 2025, but potentially establishing a new governance advisory council.
Yeah, and this discussion naturally raises a really crucial question, doesn't it? If you're going to create a new body that's intended to strengthen governance, how do you make sure it's actually effective? How do you ensure it doesn't just become another layer of bureaucracy, another talking shop?
And the report seems to offer a strong, quite clear answer based on its analysis, which is
that this council should not be a standalone, isolated body. The critical insight, according to the report, is that it must be integrated directly into Ghana's existing Open Government Partnership Framework, the OGP, and the current National Action Plan, which is NEP 5, running from 2023 to 2027.
Okay, so integrated. What's the rationale there? Why is that better than a new separate entity?
Well, the rationale the report puts forward is really compelling, I think. It argues that embedding it within the OGP framework avoids fragmenting the whole institutional landscape for governance reform. You don't end up creating a new silo doing potentially similar things.
You leverage what's already there, the existing structures.
Exactly. I mean, Ghana's been part of the OGP since 2011. It's co-created 4 action plans. There are already established multi-stakeholder processes involving government, civil society, development partners. There are existing structures for things like co-creation workshops, monitoring, review mechanisms. So embedding the council taps into this established ecosystem rather than starting from scratch.
The report does acknowledge, though, that even with 4 action plans, there have been challenges, right? It mentions issues with the previous plan, NAP4, and ongoing issues even in NO5. Things like weak local engagement, budget shortfalls for implementation, gaps in monitoring.
Yes, it does acknowledge those weaknesses. And interestingly, the report kind of positions the proposed Governance Advisory Council as a mechanism to address those very challenges, precisely because it would be embedded within the OGP NAP structure. Its mandate would flow directly from the commitments already made in the action plan. It could provide that consistent oversight needed to push past some of those implementation hurdles we've seen before.
Okay, that makes sense. The report even floats a bigger idea here, doesn't it? Something called a National Open Governance Strategy.
Yes, that's right. This is proposed as a kind of roadmap document that would unify President Mahama's reset agenda, which we talked about with the embassy case and all the existing OGP commitments, into one single coherent strategy. And the Governance Advisory Council would then function as a key oversight body within this overarching strategy. It gives it a clear place and purpose.
Okay, that provides some useful context. So what does the report suggest the actual design of this council should look like if it's integrated in this way?
Well, based on that integrated approach, it recommends a specific composition for membership. It should balance technical expertise, drawing from places like academia, think tanks, civil society organizations with practical governance experience, but critically for its independence.
Yes.
It should explicitly exclude active political office holders and known political partisans.
Right, that independence piece seems crucial for its credibility. And what about its powers? What would it actually do?
Its proposed mandate is quite robust, actually. It would involve ongoing monitoring of those OGP-linked reforms we mentioned. It would provide policy advisory functions to both the presidency and to Parliament. And importantly, it would have the power to convene public hearings or even summon senior officials for explanations on progress or lack thereof.
Okay, so giving it some necessary teeth, some authority to hold feet to the fire.
Yeah.
And how would it get that power legally? Where would its legitimacy come from?
The report suggests its legal foundation could be established through amendments to the existing OGP Steering Committee's terms of reference, perhaps alongside some targeted revisions to relevant statutes like the Public Financial Management Act, and maybe even the diplomatic service statutes we discussed earlier, creating clear links to existing legal frameworks, rather than needing a whole new act of parliament initially.
Okay. So under this proposed national open governance strategy, what's the council's specific role then? How does it function day to day?
It would essentially act as an independent guardian of the strategy's implementation. Its core job would be to evaluate progress against the strategy's main pillars, things like transparency, accountability, citizen participation, technology and innovation, anti-corruption.
Right.
It would advise the government on where things might be going off track, and importantly, it would publish an annual scorecard, basically assessing actual outcomes against the stated objectives for everyone to see.
Like a regular independent report card on how the government is doing on its own governance commitments.
Exactly that. And the report really stresses the importance of institutional integration beyond just the OGP structure itself.
Yeah.
It needs formal linkages, working relationships with bodies like the Auditor General, the Special Prosecutor, relevant parliamentary select committees, so its findings have weight and can be acted upon.
Makes sense.
It also emphasizes the need for genuine local-level engagement, maybe replicating those co-creation workshops down in all 16 regions to ensure reforms are relevant and actually get implemented beyond Accra.
So bringing this back to the listener again, why should you care about these sort of technical details of where this council sits institutionally or how it's designed?
Well, because ultimately this is about effectiveness. It really determines whether a new body that's meant to enhance accountability actually does that, or if it just ends up being ineffective, maybe duplicating efforts, or just becoming symbolic. It's about ensuring that grand ideas like transparency and citizen participation are actually built into structures that work, that have influence, that can make a difference. It's really the difference between meaningful reform and just creating another committee that sounds good on paper.
It really highlights that structure matters. How you build it determines if it can actually make accountability real.
Definitely.
Okay, let's shift gears entirely now. We're moving from those discussions about structures and systems to the impact of, well, political conduct and public reaction on trust in institutions. The report analyzes the events surrounding the arrest of Bernard Antwi Boasiako, known publicly as Chairman Wontumi by the EOCO, and the political reactions that followed that arrest.
Yes, the source describes the scene after the arrest by EOCO, that's the Economic and Organized Crime Office, a key law enforcement body here in Ghana. It apparently led to significant activity on social media, in the news, but also physically. There were scenes described outside the EOCO headquarters, including tire fires and calls for protests or even a sort of siege of the office.
And the report has a pretty direct critique of this style of reaction, doesn't it? It focuses on the how.
It does, very much so. The report argues that this kind of, quote, headline-grabbing protest and the political spectacle that surrounds it can significantly harm public trust in the very institutions involved, like the EOCO itself and the police who have to manage the situation. It even explicitly links this back to a warning in a previous criticality analysis report from IMANI, just from the week before, in May 2025, about the negative effects of these sensational tactics on public trust in law enforcement processes.
So it's not just the fact that people reacted, but the nature of that reaction that the report sees as problematic for trust.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the report includes a perspective from Dr. John Osekwapam, who makes a point that often post-regime accountability efforts, essentially, when a new government tries to hold officials accountable for actions taken during previous administrations, too often can devolve into partisan theater.
Right.
It becomes less about the actual merits of the case, the substance of the allegations, and more about which political side is seen to be winning or losing in the public eye.
And the report does mention the specific allegations that were reportedly the basis for the EOCO action against Chairman Wontumi in this case. Things like unlicensed mining, environmental pollution, and alleged fraud. Serious issues.
Very serious allegations. And the report's key point here is that the nature of the partisan reactions, the calls for a siege, the tire fires, the confrontations, immediately diverted public and media attention away from these substantive allegations. Instead, the focus shifted onto the confrontation with the police, the traffic disruptions it caused, the political back and forth, the personalities involved.
So the noise effectively drowned out the substance of why EOC might have acted in the first place.
Precisely. And this leads the report to make quite a strong argument for a different approach, for a more toned down, as they put it, a more measured form of civic action and political response in situations like this.
Okay, so what does that more disciplined approach look like, according to the source? What are they suggesting instead?
Well, it suggests approaches that demonstrate respect for the existing legal frameworks, even while people are protesting or expressing concern. For instance, simply filing the proper protest notifications under Ghana's Public Order Act signals an intent to work within the law, not against it.
Acknowledging that the legal process exists, even if you disagree with an action.
Yes. It proposes alternatives like maybe brief, permit-compliant marches, you make your point clearly, peacefully, and then you disperse. Or perhaps even 2-hour silent vigils, accompanied by carefully crafted written statements that articulate specific concerns about due process or fairness in the case.
Focused, contained actions rather than open-ended confrontation.
And importantly, it also stresses lodging formal petitions with the relevant institutions themselves. Take the concerns through official channels. File a petition with EOCO directly regarding their process if you have issues with it. Go to the courts if it's a legal matter that needs adjudication. Engage with Parliament's Select Committee on Justice to trigger legislative oversight discussions about the process or the underlying issues.
So channeling the energy into formal mechanisms.
Exactly. And the report then details what it sees as the significant benefits of this more disciplined approach. It argues, firstly, that it sharpens the focus back onto due process and the legal merits of the case itself, which is where the attention really should be.
It probably lends more credibility to the calls for fair treatment if the actions themselves are lawful and respectful of public order.
That's a key point the report makes. It's also more likely to invite constructive engagement from the institutions involved, because they're not just dealing with chaos or perceived threats. It allows police resources to be allocated more effectively to manage the event and protect both protesters and bystanders, rather than just reacting to disorder.
And thinking about media coverage.
Right. It means journalists are probably more likely to report on the actual substance of the allegations, the legal process unfolding, rather than just the drama of the street confrontation.
And for the average citizen watching.
Crucially, the report argues it means ordinary citizens are far more likely to perceive these actions as principled demands for accountability and the rule of law, rather than just dismissing them as partisan political theater or naked attempts to obstruct justice.
And this all, as the report notes, helps society escape that zero-sum logic of political vindication, where it's just about one party trying to score points against another, and puts the focus back where it should be, on ensuring the justice system functions fairly and effectively for everyone involved.
Exactly. It's fundamentally about ensuring that the pursuit of accountability doesn't itself undermine the credibility and the legitimacy of the entire process.
So, bringing this one home for the listener.
Yeah.
Why does the style, the manner of these political reactions or protests actually matter for your trust in public institutions like EOCO or the police?
Because, as the report argues, when political reactions to legitimate law enforcement actions devolve into spectacle and confrontation, it really damages the public's perception of the institutions involved. It creates so much noise that it obscures the principles of rule of law and due process. A more measured, legally compliant approach, as the report suggests, helps maintain focus on the system itself. It reinforces the idea that these institutions, while they can and should be challenged and held accountable, are the proper arena for pursuing justice and resolving disputes. It's ultimately about whether you trust the process itself to work, or if it just looks like another political battlefield.
Okay, so we've covered quite a spectrum today, all informed by this one critical report from IMANI.
Yeah, we really have. We've looked at how breakdowns in accountability overseas, like that Washington, D.C. embassy fraud case, can expose these deep-seated system failures that require quite comprehensive reforms linked back to national strategies like the Reset Agenda.
Then we explored the report's argument for how best to establish new governance structures domestically, like that proposed Governance Advisory Council, really emphasizing that integration into existing frameworks like the OGP is seen as key to making them effective.
And finally, we analyzed the report's perspective on how political conduct, specifically the manner of public reaction to law enforcement actions, can critically impact public trust in the very institutions that are designed to uphold the law and ensure accountability.
The source material really makes it clear, doesn't it, that achieving good governance and accountability is complex. It's a multifaceted challenge that operates at every level, from the very detailed management of funds in an embassy thousands of miles away, to the strategic design of national oversight councils, and even down to the way citizens and political actors conduct themselves during moments of tension right here back home.
Absolutely. And it shows how issues in one area, like that embassy fraud, connect directly to the need for broader systemic reforms guided by strategic documents like the Reset Agenda and those open government partnership commitments. You can't really isolate these things. It's all interconnected.
And I suppose that leaves us with a final thought for you, the listener, to consider as you wrap your head around all this analysis.
Which is this. If strengthening accountability and public trust relies not just on having the right rules, the right structures, the right strategies on paper, but also requires the right conduct from officials managing public money, from those advising on national policy, and crucially, from citizens and political actors reacting to institutional actions. What does that then suggest about the personal responsibility that perhaps everyone holds, regardless of their role, in actively building and maintaining robust, trustworthy democratic institutions?
It's definitely something to think about long after this deep dive ends.